Hello everyone, my name is Beatrice Jona Affron and I am the Louise and Alan Reed Music Director here at Philadelphia Ballet. On behalf of the artists, trustees, emeritus trustees, and staff of Philadelphia Ballet, we'd like to thank all of you, and I think there are many of you out there, for tuning into this live panel discussion. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge two very special donors, Judy and Alan Friedman, who have been really instrumental in conceiving of this conversation and of these 2 weeks, and getting me together with this very, very expert panel of practitioners. We are so fortunate to welcome back Colleen Neary to Philadelphia Ballet. I think it's your fourth time. Colleen was a soloist with New York City Ballet from 1969 to 1979, so she actually worked with George Balanchine. Dancers like Colleen are extremely precious to us, all of us in the dance world. Mr. B, as he is often called, personally selected Colleen to be a répétiteur, which is someone who stages his ballets for other companies. She has danced all over the world, including at the Royal Danish Ballet. She and her husband, Thordal Christensen, moved to Los Angeles in 2002, where they founded Los Angeles Ballet, and today, Colleen stages Balanchine ballets worldwide. Joining us on Zoom, someone who hardly needs any introduction, is Angel Corella. He is the Ruth and A. Morris Williams Jr. Artistic Director of Philadelphia Ballet, and he had a spectacular career as a principal dancer at American Ballet Theater from 1996 to 2012. He, like Colleen, has danced all over the world and with the most eminent dancers of his generation. He is a teacher and choreographer, and we are all very much looking forward to celebrating his 10th anniversary as our artistic director. And last but not least, I am so happy to welcome Dr. Matthew Affron to our panel. Matthew is the Muriel and Philip Berman Curator of Modern Art at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the author of numerous books on the subject with a particular focus on French art between the two world wars. Recently, he curated a phenomenal exhibit entitled Matisse in the 1930s. Full disclosure, Matthew is my brother, and we have a shared fascination with the Ballet Russes, and we have shared this fascination for a long, long time. So thank you all for being here. I'm just going to take a little more time and sort of briefly set the scene for this conversation about Prodigal Son. And the Ballet Russes. The Ballet Russes was the brainchild of Serge Diaghilev. And when we think of the word impresario, he's the person we think of. He was a serious musician as a young man, but he figured out very early on that actually his greatest gift was to be an impresario, which is a very unusual thing to learn about oneself. He didn't do all of this alone. He had many regular collaborators, most famously Václav Nijinsky, Igor Stravinsky, Leon Bakst. But on the other hand, he did not have an organizational structure like we do today in ballet companies, or a board of trustees, or even a budget often. His original idea was to bring Russian art and culture to the West, which in those days meant really Paris. The first production was not even a ballet, it was Boris Godunov, featuring the great Russian bass Fyodor Kalyapin, who became an enormous star thanks to Diaghilev. From 1909 to 1929, Diaghilev commissioned some 41 ballets, which is mind-blowing, actually, by any standards. Many of them, especially at the beginning, were based on Russian folk tales, such as Stravinsky's Firebird, but there were also classical ballets like Sleeping Beauty, which he brought, and it was an enormous hit, and also modernist works such as Parade. This unprecedented, unmatched, in my view, explosion of art, music, and dance lasted only 20 years. Out of the 41 works that were commissioned, Prodigal Son is one of the only 2 or 3 that we still perform regularly today. The other one that is in our repertoire and in many other companies is Apollo. And for that reason, I think of Prodigal Son really as an outlier in actually several ways. It's the only time, and we're going to get into more detail with our experts here, it's the only time Balanchine and Prokofiev worked together, which is sort of stunning given that they're more or less contemporaries and countrymen. It turns out they disliked each other personally and had very serious artistic differences. It is one of Mr. B's very few narrative ballets. It is the only time that Diaghilev commissioned French painter Georges Rouault to design sets and costumes. This is what we're going to ask Matthew about. And it's the very last ballet that was commissioned by Diaghilev before he died just a few months later at only age 57. So therefore, it is the last of the ballets of the original Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo. So for lots and lots of reasons, it is exceptional. Colleen. There is only one female dancing role in this ballet, I think it's safe to say, and that is the siren costume right over here, the character who engineers really the downfall of the prodigal son. You told me a few days ago that you learned the role but never danced it, which I find baffling.
Yes.
So we'd love to hear that. Please tell us this story.
Yes, well, it's a very interesting story. I grew up, of course, knowing about the prodigal son. My sister was in the company in the 1960s. You're going to now know my age soon. Balanchine had it out of the repertoire for a while, and my first teacher was Dubrovska, who was the original siren in it. And she always told me as a child in school, someday you will dance the siren. So I had that in my head. I watched the ballet many, many times because my sister was dancing the role of the siren with Edward Villela. And this was in the 1960s. And when she learned it very, very intricately with the cape, which is a big part of the siren, the cape is. And it's part of her, it's almost like a snake, it's part of her body, it's part of her sensuality. And my mother at home got a sheet and made a cape out of a sheet. And my sister would practice at home with the cape, wrapping it around her and everything. And I would watch this just in sort of like, just in such excitement of thinking, you know, wow, this is how the cape goes. And I learned what to do with the cape at a very young age. I was maybe 12, 13. And I watched every performance of The Prodigal Son. I knew everything that was coming, what lifts were coming next, what she did with the cape. I even went home and without my family knowing, I would practice with the cape, wrapping it around me and doing everything. And they would come in and say, Colleen, what are you doing? I was going, I'm doing the siren. So long story short, I got into New York City Ballet. And I'm of a sort of stature and a tall woman. And those were usually the sort of, I wouldn't say typecasting, but sort of the role that a taller woman would be doing for the siren. And because I felt I had such a knowledge of the role, knowing absolutely everything the siren did, and my sister talked about it at home, and everything that went on in the pas de deux, and how she felt about it, and how she seduced him, and the whole sort of story of the ballet. So I felt I knew it. So I did a mistake. I went to Mr. Balanchine, Mr. B as we called him, and I said, Mr. B, I want to do the siren. And knowing Balanchine, you rarely went, maybe certain people did, but you rarely went and asked to do a role. But I took it upon myself to do that and asked him, I said, Mr. B, I would love to do the siren. And he said, he had a nasal accent, he went, no. And I said, why no? No, you will never do a siren. And I said, oh, but I really want to do the siren. And he said, no, you won't do the siren. And I said, why? And he said, no, she's not a nice lady, so to speak. So what did that mean? Okay, not a nice lady. And I said, well, my sister did it. And he said, well, that's different.
Oh.
Now, I'm not saying anything about that, except that I was always the child around, and I was a child in Balanchine school, and I did ballets with him when I was a child, and he always thought of me as little Colleen, even though I'm very tall. I was little Colleen. I was the child. I was the sweet child. The siren was not that in his mind. And certain people he didn't see in this sort of mature way, and I guess I was one of them. Mm-hmm. And so later on in my life, I've had sort of a long career. I was in another company, and I saw, as a principal dancer, and I saw that the directors were bringing The Prodigal Son. And so I thought, aha, now is my chance. And it was sort of the end, I would say, of the end of my dancing career. And I went to the directors and I said, you're bringing The Prodigal Son, I have to do the siren. And they said, well, you're not cast for it. So I sort of felt, I'm not meant to do the siren, But now I feel I'm meant to teach the siren.
Absolutely, you're meant to teach
And
the
I
siren.
was understudying it so on and got to do some rehearsals of it, but I feel it's something that I know really well, and also being around Balanchine and working with him in different aspects as I worked with him, I feel I know sort of what he wanted, even though he didn't very much rehearse it. I felt I knew what he wanted in the aspect of the story, and it is very much a story ballet.
I wanted to ask you also, this is such an early work
Yes.
for Mr. B, and I figure that he was still sort of crafting his choreographic language.
Yes.
I wonder if there are some trademarks in Prodigal Son that our audiences could be looking for?
Yes. Well, you know, there's certain characters in this, not only the sort of high jumping, the energetic of the prodigal son, but also there are these characters that we often call the goons, but they are the 9 drinking companions that come around him. And there are many dances with them and his 2 friends and the prodigal son together that there's a lot of musical syncopation in there that he uses later on in his ballets. There's a count 1 and or 2 and a lot of the steps are all of a sudden very what we would call neoclassic in the day, and they're very modern in their way. For 1929, he has steps in there and musicalities that are very, very different from what anyone had ever seen at that time, and he used them later on. There are some steps in there, some modern steps that he has the men doing that are exactly what he did in some of his ballets in before he passed away. So,
and we were talking about how there was a kind of vigorous disagreement between him and Prokofiev.
Yes.
Because Prokofiev seemed to have a vision that this would be more a naturalistic style
Yes.
of dancing.
So as the story goes, as I know it, is that Prokofiev commissioned actually Balanchine for this, and he had an idea that it was a very real and sort of idealistic vision. That's what Prokofiev had. And when he saw Balanchine's choreography, especially the siren, he pictured her as a demure, soft woman, and she was not. And there I come into the picture as too demure. But
Yeah.
I think that Prokofiev thought of the whole thing as in a different light, and had a different vision for it than Balanchine. So as the story goes, he didn't receive the royalties for his choreography.
Right.
And I know from personal with Balanchine that he never forgot that. And he never did another ballet to Prokofiev. And often some of us would say, what about Romeo and Juliet? What about Cinderella? What about the beautiful music? And he would go, no, not Prokofiev.
There was a real rift there.
There was a real rift. And he
Yeah.
had a problem even rehearsing this ballet at times. He would not come in to rehearse it.
You mean in later years?
Later years.
Wow. So
Sometimes
put
he
it
did
in-
if there were certain people that came to do it, he would, but then he would leave it. So
Did Dubrovka coach sirens in
I
later
don't
years?
believe she did.
Oh,
I
okay.
know that they have the George Balanchine Foundation has a film of Yvonne Mounsey, who did it also in probably the 40s or 50s, and she did a sort of coaching with somebody for the siren. So there are some archives out there with that.
Right. So many great.
But Balanchine was, Dubrovska was very much that type of, she was just gorgeous and would teach us. Yeah.
If you're curious on Zoom, there is no film of the wonderful Dubrovka dancing this, but there are films on
There.
YouTube of her teaching,
Yes.
and you can see the way she walks into the room.
Oh,
and
yes.
You say to yourself, "Oh, well."
She wore
yes, I
pointe shoes. She
understand.
was gorgeous. She was very elegant. She had a little dog that she brought with her, and
Amazing character.
yeah, she was wonderful.
Angel, I have some questions about dancing the role of the prodigal son. So one of the many ways in which this is an unusual ballet for Mr. Balanchine is that the principal character is a man, which is
Yes.
not so. I mean, Apollo. That's also, you might say the same about Apollo, but not so many other ballets that I know of. From where I'm standing on the podium, I have to say that the first scene of Prodigal Son is particularly terrifying, because the dancer looks like he's being shot out of a cannon. He's jumping over the fences, and it's extremely physical. I mean, dancing is always physical, but this seems to be amped up to an even higher level. My question for you, Angel, is what is it like to dance this role? Does it feel like you're being shot out of a cannon at the beginning?
It does actually, and the really difficult thing is to show all the different layers of how he literally grows on stage as he's doing the role. I mean, he starts as a very young, impetuous, very full of energy, full of anger, full of desire, but for the wrong things. And then how he goes slowly going through all the different emotions of learning, but doing it in literally in 25, 30 minutes, and almost having a whole life in front of your eyes with this ballet that is, to me, I mean, it's a masterpiece. And I've done it in different times of my life when I was very young in my early 20s, and then I revisited later on, and the approach is completely different. Each part of the ballet, you see it with a different eye.
Oh, sorry, we're just having a little trouble hearing you. I think you ended your sentence. What my follow-up is that the prodigal son very famously crawls back to his family at the end of the ballet. In really one of the most sort of heartbreaking scenes of any ballet that I've worked on. It's really right up there with the great dramatic scenes. And I don't know of another work where in 25 minutes one goes through the extremes of this
Absolutely.
one. So I know you were just speaking about that a little bit, but physically, what's it like to go from jumping, looks like 10 feet in the air from where I am, to crawling on your knees? Is there any special preparation a dancer has to go through?
It's a very unusual physicality, as Colleen was saying. Although Mr. Balanchine used most of the time classical technique, with these ballets, not only the dancing and the technique that is very challenging, but it's the physicality of it, how you use every single part of your body to portray this anger, and at the same time, like when he's beating on his legs and then he has to jump. That's one of the most scary parts of the whole ballet. You have to jump over a table or a fence, and it's so physical. And at the end, when you have to literally crawl on your knees, and in rehearsal, you sometimes you wear a little bit of knee pads so you can protect your knees, but when you're on stage, you have to do it for real. And the physicality of it, it makes it real. It makes, like, everything that is going on, it becomes very realistic because it's real. I mean, you're literally crawling on stage, and it's a great feeling. Yeah. I mean, not that, but it's a great feeling to achieve at the end of the ballet.
Very rewarding. I would think it would be rewarding. It's now that I'm thinking about the prodigal son and the role of Apollo, how very utterly different they are.
Absolutely.
In the physical
but
nature of it?
They are very different, but they both take from a youth to a mature. But the prodigal son follows this story, and it's actually like, a 3-act ballet put together in 30 minutes, is that the son goes from, wanting to get away to a whole life of in the city, to everything happening to him, to the end crawling back to the father. And he actually does this and portrays this with this dancer from beginning to end. Right. And it carries it through. So, by the end when they're crawling on the knees, it's very painful, but they are in pain at that point.
Yeah, it's visceral. And so the music is also painful.
It works. It works that way. There is a build-up, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And the amazing part, sorry, I don't know if you can hear me, is that I don't want to give away a lot of the ballet, but they take all your clothes off, and literally they leave you naked on stage. But I think that the most incredible part is that, and I don't want to be cheesy with this, but it makes you feel naked, your soul, like someone has opened you completely, and it has revealed your soul completely, and you feel absolutely naked, not physically but emotionally. It's a very vulnerable and very beautiful ballet. Yeah.
Also very unusual.
Absolutely.
For Balanchine.
Yes, well, this whole ballet is very unusual for Balanchine. He never went into that deep feeling, even working with him. If you showed too much emotion, he would be like, don't just do the steps, don't show that much emotion. But with this, it just happens, and it's very unlike him in many ways, because it shows another side of, and a very emotional role.
I'm also thinking about that, most of these people who were working in the Ballet Russe were expatriates, right? They had run away from Russia. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that The Prodigal Son was a parable and a theme and a story that captivated these guys. I'm so thrilled that we're doing this Zoom in front of these beautiful costumes in our wonderful costume shop. And we're going to turn the discussion over to the design. Originally, Diaghilev tapped Henri Matisse to design the sets and costumes for this ballet. However, fearing that Diaghilev would again fail to pay him for his work, as he did with Le Chant du Rossignol, Matisse backed away from the project. So Diaghilev turned to, am I allowed to call him a symbolist painter?
Sure.
Okay. French symbolist painter, or whatever Matthew says, Georges Rouault. So can you tell us, first of all, something about who was Georges Rouault?
Well, so Georges Rouault is an artist of Matisse's generation. In fact, they knew each other when they were young and unknown, and then they knew each other when they were established and famous and eminent. So very same generation. He was born in 1871 in Paris. Interestingly, for what I'm going to say a little bit later, as an adolescent, Rouault apprenticed with a stained glass maker. Oh. Then he went to art school. And that's where he first met Matisse, when Matisse was young. And we're talking about the 1890s now. And he went to study with a painter named Moreau, who was a very, very important figure in the Paris art world, both because he was innovative in the way in which he painted frequently mythological and biblical subjects, and the biblical part is important in this discussion, and also because he was a very, very progressive teacher. He encouraged students like Matisse and Rouault and others to break some of the rules of training, and that helped to get these people on the path to becoming what we call avant-garde artists who went beyond the comfort zone of ordinary viewers, artists who would be on the cutting edge in the 20th century.
So given this background in stained glass and in religious painting, what are some things we should notice about the sets and costumes? That we don't have the set here, but we do have some of the costumes that Rouault, because he designed both, sets and costumes.
He designed both. And let me back up 1 second.
Sure.
There's one more important part of the Rouault story. And that is that although he had a secular upbringing, at age 24, he converted to Catholicism. And he joined a group of intellectuals who were interested in bringing religion and spirituality into modern literature and art. And this made him something of an anomaly, not totally unique. There are other examples, but it's something a little different. The idea of someone who wants to really bring religious art into modern art in the 20th century. Another example would be Marc Chagall. From a different point of view, though also working in Paris. And there were other artists of the late 19th century who had some similar ideas. And that's very, very important, I think, for why it is that when Matisse, who also had a bad experience with the whole process of making the design for the Song of the Nightingale in 1920, and felt that he didn't want to take away from his painting. And so he said no, right? Why would Boris Kochno, who was one of the collaborators of Diaghilev, say, why don't you go?
He was the librettist, in fact.
Okay, he's the librettist. I didn't know that. He says, go to Rouault, right? So Rouault is known as a painter, an important modern painter with a big interest in Old Testament subjects. Though, of course, it was also risky because Rouault had never done a project with theater sets and costumes.
Oh, wow.
So that's sort of the background.
I'm sorry, did he do other theatrical projects after this?
Okay, you just asked me a question I don't know the answer to.
Okay, we'll look it up and we'll find out.
Why don't you look that up and report back
Someone
to the class
else is going to look that up.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Anyway.
So let's talk about the sets. You're looking at the costumes, which are beautiful. I'm very thrilled to see them so up close. Yeah. But if we go to the first slide, and someone would let me know if the slide is up, right? I'm showing you not the actual full-size backdrop, but one of Rouault's designs, which is now in the Serge Liffard collection at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in in Connecticut, in
Can we
Hartford.
just pause to say that Serge Lefar was the original Prodigal Son?
Yes.
Oh, and
Yeah.
Serge Lefar was the original
Yes,
Prodigal
he was.
Son.
Yes,
So
he was.
I knew there was a connection there.
There it is.
Right? So coming from,
really
so he acquired this drawing. This is one of the sketches that Ruo did for the backdrop for scenes 1 and 3,
Okay, yes.
right? Because it repeats.
Yes, it repeats.
Right?
Yes.
And what you see is one of Ruo's trademark landscape layouts, which is a building with a tower, which looks a little bit like a castle or a temple, but it's not exactly clear, shooting up into the sky against a horizontal landscape with a road running down towards it. What you have is a kind of architectural landscape configuration, very reduced, very elemental. Here, I think the road stands for the open road that the prodigal son will go on to embark on his adventures with his confidants. That's one thing. Second slide, please. You're seeing the design for scene 2, which is the tent scene, the banqueting scene, right? And look at the way in which he uses very, very strong outlines and very, very strong colors, right, in his designs. That's going to be important. Okay, that was scene 2. Next slide, please. I just want to show you a little bit more of how Ruo imagined this in his sketches. You're looking at some studies of dancers. Ruo said that what he liked about the ballet was the way in which the dancers, together as groups, in groups or in pairs, or made overall rhythmic movements with strong emotional power against the backdrop. Mm-hmm. And he also liked very much the way in which the bright colors of the costumes, which is what is behind us, interacted with the colors of the backdrop. So this is an artist who really had a sense of the overall visual intensity of backdrop, costume, and movement.
Pretty good for the first time, I just want to say.
Pretty good for the first time, yeah. Well, we're talking about a real artist, right, who brings a very, very fully formed compositional and coloristic vision, which he's developed over years in his paintings and in his prints and his drawings, and he finds a subject that somehow allows him to take what he already has developed to a new level. That's what's going on here, I would say. Mm-hmm. Next slide, please. I think you're seeing studies of vases, just to give you a sense of how he imagined that part of the set. Next slide, please. You should be seeing stage photographs of the production in London in 1929, so that you can see how, in the black and white photographs, this was all worked out on stage. And the final slide, please. I think you're seeing a photograph of the 29 London stage production with one of the drawings in which Ruo imagines in Act 3 what happens when the prodigal son has crawled back home and encounters his father who forgives him and so forth. Mm-hmm. So this sequence of slides hopefully has given you a sense of the ways in which Ruo, working at small scale, because he didn't paint the backdrops, they were painted by the stage designer who worked with the Ballet Russe, Alexander Shevardidze. I'm going to massacre the pronunciation, but he translated these painted drawings into the actual backdrops.
And I should mention, of course, that these are not the original costumes or backdrops, because they would have disintegrated many years. But they are the original designs, and they were held to a very particular standard, I'm sure. So it will be wonderful for our audience, to having seen these slides, to see it in literally in living color. I think I would be remiss if I didn't say a few words about our composer, Serge Prokofiev, and his relationship with the Ballet Russe, just to round it out, because the whole raison d'etre, I think, for the Ballet Russe was the way these art forms came together, and how and I think it explains our enduring fascination, is that one doesn't exist without the other. Diaghilev actually was the first to commission Prokofiev to compose any ballet music. And his first ballet, which I maybe there's a film, I don't know that there is Chou, Buffoon. I think it was commissioned in 1915, but it actually premiered or was revised in 1921 with the help of Leonid Massin, who was one of the other Russian choreographers who worked a great deal, not only with the original Ballet Russe, but carried on the tradition with his own company. And this was a big success for Prokofiev. His next ballet was 1927, also for the Ballet Russe, Le Pas d'Acier, the steel step. A big success. It was, I should mention, this was a time in Prokofiev's life when his music was particularly gnarly, for lack of a better word. For anyone who's seen his opera, The Fiery Angel, it's to our ears kind of hard to actually recognize Prokofiev because it's extremely dense. Now, it doesn't mean that his music wasn't also dense later on. But in 1929, when he wrote Prodigal Son, he had, and there seems to be some relationship, he had just become a Christian Scientist and had decided that he needed to simplify his harmonic and melodic language. How those two things actually come together, I'm no expert in, but there was a kind of a new simplicity. It's not simple music, don't get me wrong. It's very complex music, and to hear Colleen and the dancers count it versus the way it's notated versus the way one hears it, you know, there's a lot going on. It's extremely contrapuntal. However, he does sort of meet us halfway down the aisle. Each character has their own melody or leitmotif, as Wagner would have said, and they're very clear. And when two characters whose melodies we've heard before appear together on stage, he gives us both melodies at the same time. It's incredibly clever and incredibly well crafted. Each character has a very distinct thumbprint. If the audience is looking for a special moment to listen to, there's a section we call Magic Fingers, during which the prodigal son is being robbed blind by his so-called friends. And it features our fantastic clarinet section, so please listen and applaud vigorously. It's very difficult music. It's it's that fast, and it's series of notes that get passed from one instrument to another, but the audience doesn't even realize. It sounds like one instrument, and it's fiendishly difficult and extremely satisfying to do. Here's what Diaghilev said about Prokofiev's music. He said his music had never been more clear, more simple, grain of salt, more melodious, and more tender. And what he's referring to, I believe, with the tender remark, is the final scene, the one where the prodigal son literally drags himself across the stage into his father's waiting arms. It has some of the heartbreaking qualities, I think, that we will hear in Romeo and Juliet just 6 years later. So I wanted to, should I open it up now for questions from Zoom land? Yeah? All right, I'm going to read. With more than 41 ballets in the Ballet Russe repertoire, why do you think this one stands out of the few that are still performed? That's a really good question.
Balanchine.
One word answer.
He was a master at his craft, and both this and Apollo stand out because it can live today. They're timeless in that way.
Yeah.
There are very many sections in it that you can see were done at that time, but still today they live on. And not a lot of choreography from that time period has that aspect to it. Maybe some of Nijinsky's, but not a lot.
Yeah, I should mention that a lot of the music lives on today, right?
Yes.
We wouldn't have, we still
Yes.
have Firebird and Petrushka and Rite of Spring and many other pieces that have been re-choreographed so a lot of the music lives on. I wonder too, and please correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the costumes that one sees in ballet ruse books, of which there are many with gorgeous photographs, some of the costumes look really very bulky and difficult to dance in. I was looking at Parade, Matthew, and the designer is, I forget who it's Picasso.
Yes.
did those costumes, and I would think that might make it difficult to keep restaging these works if the costume
they overdressed at times, but these are not. And so and the original costumes for Apollo were also very, very, very different.
Right. I mean, isn't it true that many of Balanchine's early, there are a number of ballets that he
the Four
did and
Temperaments
brought back,
yes,
but stripped down
to the leotard,
so that they were
yes.
just
See the
practical
body.
and danceable, right? Yeah. All right, good question. Can you share with us how you stage and cast the ballet?
This ballet in particular? Well, I oftentimes when doing this ballet and working with different companies, the director, of course, knows best his dancers. And Helm knows this ballet very well, as he was not only incredible in it and danced it. And that helps when you have a knowledge of what, it is about. But this particular ballet, it is in a way, I'm not going to say a typecasting, but it is in a way a casting that has to be sort of specific. A lot of ballets can be danced by any height, any look, any shape, but it takes a very, very energetic sort of young abandonment with the male dancer, and often it's not a very tall sort of, what we call Prince type of dancer. It's an exuberant, technical, incredibly beautiful male dancer. And the woman, as I said before, has always, like Dubrovska was, been tall, elegant, beautiful, legs, and it's that difference between the two of them that he's also attracted to. She's overpowering. So with those two roles, it's almost obvious in a company that you have dancers that are specific for those roles. And as far as the other characters go in it, the 9 drinking companions are, and it's a very fun part, so I don't want to give that away either, but they're a little bit wild and crazy and, overtake him also, as do his 2 friends. Start in the beginning as his friends and don't end up that way.
I was just going to ask, have you ever known of a production where the siren was shorter?
I have not shorter than the male usually, but I have done a couple of productions in companies where she is smaller, but she has to have a movement and a sort of dominance and superiority in that. Yeah. So, and I'm sure companies have done it in that way. It's usually not in opposition. It's not a very tall man and a very small woman,
right,
in that way.
Right.
Yes.
That's unusual too, though,
it's
right?
Very
for
unusual.
Balanchine. I mean,
yes, it is.
Generally,
yes, it is.
They're male, female tend to be.
Yes, but it's different. He's a young guy that goes away, and she has to be this sort of creature that comes in and seduces him is the word. So,
yeah.
And takes over. And she's sort of the queen of the kingdom there.
And we should also mention that the role of the father is usually played
yes.
by a very tall person.
Yes.
In our
It
case,
is.
we
And
have Charles Askegaard. We're so fortunate to have him.
Yes, we are. And the thing is, with the father in sort of what I'm calling the old days, when I was dancing, I won't call it the old days now, but it was always done by a sort of senior member of the company. And they often wore like big platforms to make them even bigger and taller, platform shoes, and the cape is very long, and he has a very big wig. We call him God. He comes in, he's very holy, he's very, down to earth and there.
This reminds me something that maybe I should have mentioned earlier, which is the adaptation of the parable. So it's from the book of Luke, and the parable tells us about the son asking for his inheritance early so that he can go out into the world and have sow his wild oats. And sort of the next thing you know, at least in the King James version, he's crawling back to his father. It doesn't flesh out the stuff that happens in between. And so it's the librettist here, Boris Kochno, thank you. He it's very fortunate that he had so much insight into all of the episodes that would go in between those two bookends.
It's wonderful, and that's the buildup of it.
Yeah.
From the beginning to the end.
Yeah.
And how he comes back, it's
makes it explicit.
very
really.
emotional.
Yeah.
Yes.
Next question. Can you share a bit more about what it's like to work with a new set of dancers every time you set a ballet? Now, that's not exactly the case this time.
No, you know, I love coming here. This is what I call my second home from my home. I've worked with the company a lot. I know the dancers very well. I love Angel. I love all of you. I feel very much in kindred here because I've staged a lot of ballets here. And the dancers are wonderful. So I have a sort of feeling of walking in here that I don't have to learn the dancers and know the dancers and what their strengths are, their weaknesses, or so on. Still, the ballets that I've staged here are all very, very different, from Agon to, Ballet Imperial to this ballet. So they're all very different in their style and everything. But I've worked with most of the dancers. And when I go to different companies, what is it like? It's always a challenge, and I think what the main thing that I try to do is not only in a ballet like this tell them what the story is and what they have to portray in it, but that they must make it their own. And to own it is one of the most important things with any role or any ballet that you produce or stage, is that each dancer is different, so each dancer has to go in there and make it their own.
I also must say I have that experience when I guest conducted other places, especially if it's something that I've done here, which has been my artistic home for a long time. And it's kind of an adjustment period, and I have to sort of strip away my preconceptions and really, take in these new people for who they are and the strengths that they bring. It's an interesting process.
It is.
Oh, question for Matthew. What is it like to see the artwork and painting come to the stage in a larger-than-life way?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think I've read enough accounts of artists talking about the feeling of seeing their design suddenly realized on the scenographic scale of a theater backdrop. I think I think that for artists of the generation of Rouault, many of them had an idea that if you could transcend the scale of an ordinary easel picture, you could realize your vision in a completely new way, almost architectural. That's a theme that comes up over and over again. The idea that the work of art can have this sort of largeness that takes over a space was very, very compelling to an artist like Rouault, others of his generation. And I also think that for many artists, and I suspect for Rouault, the idea that there's a collaboration between you and your design, let's say, and the work of the musicians and of the dancers and the choreographers also makes it possible to go beyond the ordinary confines in a way that was undoubtedly fascinating to these creators.
Well, I was very struck by what you were saying before about Rouault having such a clear idea of what the movement would look like against the fixed background, because of course in a painting there's no actual movement, right?
But there's rhythm. But there's visual rhythm, right? And especially for an artist like that, it's very important. In fact, I was struck by something Colleen said about the question of naturalism versus anti-naturalism, right, in the music, but also, Rouault is not a naturalistic painter. He's a painter who is very stylized. And just to come back to something that I was saying before, right? The colors in the backdrop are smoldering, and they're very deep. And he thought of them as having something like the quality of stained glass in a church. And he thought that kind of color meant that he was painting a reality that was a higher reality, not an ordinary reality, but a more spiritual or more immaterial sort of world. And the same thing with the way in which he depicts figures, often very frontal, often very impressive. And I think something of the stylization of the dance is sympathetic here. His figures have the fixity, and he said this, the fixity of all kinds of very old and very religious kinds of art, like Egyptian art, Romanesque art, Byzantine art. Figures with that kind of static grandeur that also tells you that what he's concerned with is something way beyond the ordinary realm and much more mysterious. And I would say that that's where the question of not being naturalistic connects the music to the aesthetic of the backdrop.
Yeah, it's so puzzling to me that Prokofiev had that image, because there is nothing particularly naturalistic about the music or the sets and costumes or the choreography. In fact, they all seem to be
that's
very
why
much,
they work together.
and they work so brilliantly together. So we're asking ourselves now, I think part of that disagreement was just sort of endemic to who these people were. And I think there was another story going on. It's sort of a backstory, which is that there was this great uncertainty in Europe and in Russia, of course, at the time. It's 1929, and in fact, all over the world. And while Balanchine and Stravinsky were considering moving farther and farther west, they were very kind of upset that Prokofiev was thinking, no, he would really rather go back to Russia. They were telling him, don't do it. It's a terrible idea. But like the Prodigal Son, I must say, he went back thinking that he had been promised protection by the Russian government. He was tired of having to concertize so much. He was a great pianist, and he was tired of having to do that to make money. He wanted to spend more of his time composing. And so he was arguing with them at the time, saying, no, if we go back, we won't have to work so hard at the things we don't want to be, projects we don't want to be working on. We can really be focusing. And there was a rift that was just not fixable. So I suspect that that may have had something to do with their differences. Question for Angel. How has the ballet influenced you? How did it influence you when you were a dancer? And how is it continuing to influence you now as you are not becoming a choreographer, definitely a choreographer with a growing catalog?
Well, as a dancer, it definitely helped me grow. Again, like I said, in the different times of my career, I approach it completely different because of who I was as a person and as an artist. You approach roles very differently. At the beginning, the first time that I did it, like I said, I was full of energy and I took it with all the passion that you have when you're in your early 20s. When I did it later on, it was in my early 30s, and then I was able to give the different details and different things that when you're more of an adult and you've learned a little bit more about yourself, you can put into and giving importance to moments that when you're young, you probably wouldn't even pay attention to it. And it's funny that Prokofiev didn't think that the siren, it was the right energy or the right demure, which I think with the music is sort of, it's one of the biggest impact of the whole ballet. I mean, I think that whole entrance with her, like line with the cape and how she's doing all these kicks on the floor is so. It's like the music is like the dancing is singing and with the music. I mean, it's so together. So I think that is what what it was the biggest impact in my career. And I think also. I mean, I've never been a dancer that likes to, I never knew how to count. I don't know how to count music, as you know, Beatrice. I don't know if you can hear me. But yeah, I usually don't know how to count music. I really follow the music. So with this piece of music, it was one of the hardest things to do is to actually follow the music without having to count. But I actually learned how to recognize it, and it really helped me later on now throughout my career with Prokofiev, with Stravinsky, with all these composers that to recognize beats, and it also helped me with when I'm choreographing, to recognize the music without having sometimes to count, which is it's not as easy as it looks, but
Yeah, I should say that having now helped Angel put together quite a large number of ballets, he's being modest. I've never heard a dancer or choreographer sing full ballets from beginning to end with the accuracy with which he can do it. It's a very remarkable skill, and no, it's not insulting. It's very impressive, and it actually, for me, it's an insight into you as a dancer, because clearly you had it internalized.
I tell the dancers all that. You have to learn the score, and you have to be able to sing it.
Yeah.
You know, and especially with this ballet, it's not ballet you want to count. Sometimes I have to go into that if they're totally lost, but it's a ballet that you have to learn every single count. And I'm sure Angel knows every score and can sing them
thoroughly.
Yes.
It's remarkable.
I encourage the dancers to do that too, because I think that it's important that the dancers dance with the music and not with counts. I think that ultimately the music is what it drives you, and that's what makes the performance special.
Maybe 2 more questions? Yeah. Beatrice, can you share more about the process of rehearsing the orchestra and when the dancers might hear the orchestra first? Well, yes, I can. So the process of rehearsing with the orchestra is very compressed. So next week is Tech Week. I will meet with the orchestra on Tuesday morning from 10 to 1. We will rehearse Prodigal Son, and we'll start on the Dream. And Wednesday morning from 10 to 1, we will finish the Dream and perhaps address a few more things in Prodigal Son. Thursday is dress rehearsal in the afternoon from 1 to 4:30, and that is the first and only time the dancers will hear the live orchestra. I must say, though, that some dancers have caught on to our schedule, and I've started showing up and to listen, and they sit in the back and stretch during our reading rehearsals, which is so wonderful. And they're all welcome to do that when their schedules allow. But basically, they just have that one dress rehearsal, which is the same day as opening night, to become accustomed to the sound of the orchestra. And it always impresses me no end that they are able to make those adjustments as quickly as they do. Last question. Wondering this is for Angel, what checklist Angel uses when considering which ballets to program, and especially what this particular work brings to the company and to our Philadelphia audience. So in other words, why are we doing this, and why are we doing it now, and how do those decisions get made?
Well, it's a very difficult thing to do, because first is the wish list, and then the reality list, and then I usually put together ballets that I think that they're going to be wonderful for our audience, wonderful for our dancers to perform, and something that is going to create a history and continue the history that the company has had up until now, and create, what the Philadelphia Ballet and Philadelphia audiences, what the future of dance will be. So I try to bring a little bit of everything. There are some people that love the full lengths. There are some people that love Balanchine. Some others that like a little bit more eclectic, more modern choreography. So we try to bring a little bit of everything, but always things that are going to be fun for the audience, but also wonderful for the dancers to perform and to experience.
I think our time is winding down. So first, I'd like to give enormous thanks to our expert panel for sharing your insights and your expertise. I've been looking forward to this all year long, and I don't think I will ever tire of the subject of the Ballet Russe and not only the explosion that it created in its time, but the effect that it has on us down through the generations. I mean, you can argue that they invented the idea of the mixed rep program. We didn't have that before. So many things that we take for granted come from that. Whole companies arose, you know, New York City Ballet, ABT, Royal Ballet. These were all things that were made possible by that astonishing 20 years. I would like to thank Judy and Alan Friedman, as well as Grant Grapentrog for sponsoring our upcoming production of Prodigal Son, as well as Frederick Ashton's The Dream. There is another ballet on the program, which I know audiences will really enjoy. If you haven't purchased your tickets yet, although I suspect a lot of you on this Zoom have, but get your friends and please do purchase those tickets. And you may want to round out your weekend by visiting the Philadelphia Museum of Art. There is much, much to see always. Thank you all so very much for your great questions and for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you.